Welcome, everyone, to a Thursday edition of Back Your Play with Q. I'm your host, as always, Rich Quinones. You can check us out online, YouTube channel, Rich Q and Q, Twitter, IG, at Rich Q and Q, our guy, Nick Kosko, at Nick Kosko 59, College Sports for On3 Sports. Also does a great job with RU Wrestling, Cal Athletics in our backyard. March Madness right around the corner. We've got some draft little nuggets we have to catch up on. We've got some coaches who might be on the hot seat in college hoops, so we'll break it down for the next couple of moments. Nick, always appreciate a couple of moments, pal. How are you?
Absolutely, Rich. I appreciate you having me on as always. Excuse the makeshift studio today in the middle of a move, but I promise you there will be back to normal, plus upgrades coming within the next couple of weeks.
He said, and he mentioned to added the upgrades coming. That's okay. We make do with what we have as long
of course, we always
the
do.
content we're sprouting is good. That's all that matters. All right, so we'll get into some college basketball because a couple of schools of thought here. Jim Boeheim retires, steps down, whatever we want to call it, de facto goodbye. 47 seasons, over 1,000 wins. You know, we remember he had about 100 of those forfeited due to violations, 35 trips into March Madness, 5 Final Fours and a title. I mean, Boeheim, Wright, Coach K. I mean, it's almost like the changing of the guard now with these coaches in college hoops, but it's still remarkable when you coach for 35, 40 something odd years and you only have one title or multiple titles. I feel as though Jim Boeheim should have had so many more titles. And remember, the knock on him was he couldn't get over the hump.
Right.
And win a
right. And you go back to Jim Boeheim's lone championship. And again, I don't pretend to be an expert on Syracuse basketball or an expert on Jim Boeheim. I just know the impact he's had on college basketball, but his one national title was with Carmelo Anthony.
That's right.
Well, let's not forget that.
Great run.
He had a generational player and a future NBA Hall of Famer on his team to lead that orange squad, which is considered one of the best squads over the last 20, 25 years at this point. So at least in terms of college basketball, but you're right. You would think a guy of Jim Boeheim's stature would be a guy that would have 2, 3, maybe 4 national titles, be on par with the Coach K's, the John Calipari's, obviously going, but Bill Self at this point. Again, just guys that are the modern day guys that have multiple national titles, and he just wasn't. Now, that doesn't take away from how great of a coach he was. And if you look at the latter stages of his career, particularly over the last, let's just say 10 years, of course, you had they sprinkled in the Elite 8 appearances when they were low seats. I believe they had a Final Four appearance within the last 10 years as well. So, he still found ways to make something out of nothing with some of these teams that he's had in recent years. Obviously, the past couple of years, he's kind of worn out his welcome, so to speak, in the eyes of some Syracuse fans. And the retirement yesterday, I believe it actually was yesterday. It all blends together at this point. It was very weird because they weren't good this year. They get bounced early from the ACC tournament, and barring a miracle run to an ACC tournament title, this team was not going to make the NCAA tournament this year. And then he was asked multiple times by the same reporter. I forget her name. And he was asked about, are you retiring? What's your future like? And he said, it's up to the university. It's up to the university. I didn't say that. It's one of those things. And then 2 hours later, which I missed until last night, again, shut my brain off for a couple of hours after ingesting so much Jim Boeheim this week. And I find out he's gone. He's retired. And they hired an internal candidate to replace him. So as far as the impact he's had on college basketball, it's immense. And vacated wins aside, the guy won over 1,000 games. He's one of the greatest coaches in college basketball history. He was at Syracuse for nearly 50 years as a head coach. So, it's going to look vastly different in the next, let's just say 2 to 5 to 10 years without him. But I think I'm not going to say he overstayed his welcome, but this was definitely finally time for him to step away.
Yeah, no doubt. I mean, and you're right. It almost left, it's open to interpretation. Well, I didn't say that. Well, did you get pushed out? Did you get fired? Were you stepping back? Is there an opportunity to come back? It seems like that's in, as you mentioned, 40 plus years, 47 to be exact. And if you hearken back to the days of the Big East, with the Calhouns, right? With the Connecticut's, with the Syracuse, with the St. John's, with the Georgetowns, with the Novas, that was the Mecca, the heyday. And then
absolutely,
we all know, obviously, with the transfer.
Right, because he was a guy that was, if I remember correctly, at least out in the public, he was he wasn't trashing the move, if I remember, but at least he was not, he was against it.
He
The
was
move to the
against.
ACC.
He
Didn't
was.
like the realignment of the conferences. Obviously you look at the Big East of basketball now, it's not the Big East of 15, 20 years ago at this point. It's not that classic Big East feel. And then when college sports realigned, you saw the realignment to the ACC. Syracuse, I guess we're used to it now, football wise and other sports wise. Probably basketball wise, we are used to Syracuse being an ACC team, but I think with the figurehead of Jim Boeheim in that program, it's like, well, this is not really an ACC team. No. This is a Big East team. We're not used to seeing Syracuse and Duke playing every single season. No. And again, in the grand scheme of things, it's not that big of a deal because, again, you get the realignment money, obviously, and Syracuse being a Power 5 school in all sports obviously helps the entire university. But I think just with the old school mentality and the feel and the bravado of Jim Boeheim, you're like, this is not Syracuse basketball over the last, let's just say almost 10 years now.
It's not. And I go back to what you just said regarding the Big East. The Big East came into play because of the games on Tuesdays and Thursdays, right? Back in the day with ESPN and the Carrier Dome. That's when the Big East, and you had, Carnesecca, and you had Thompson, you had Raleigh Moss. That was the heyday, the Mecca. And you're right, he wasn't really supportive of that move, and rightfully so, because I still equate Syracuse, right, the Orangemen, right, not the Orange, to the Big East. But yes, definitely Hall of Famer. You can't dispute what he's done. And then conversely, when you look at his old conference in the Big East and you look at what's transpired over the last several years with Georgetown, it's tough, man. And I think we talked a little bit about this a while ago. When you've got a former player like Pat Ewing, one of my all-time favorites with the Knicks, great college player. We know that. You're talking about 3 Final Fours and a title run with Georgetown back in the day. When you now are taking over the helm and you don't win in your conference, you just get waxed by 30 something, almost 40 by Villanova. You finished 7-25. You've won 13 games over 2 seasons. And more importantly, equated to being an NFC East head coach. You can't win within your division, your conference in this realm. 29 game losing streak in the Big East, 2-18 in the Big East, 75-109 as a head coach. Man, you can't sit there and say, well, it's the recruiting in this. Okay, I get it. You're going to try to build around one guard in Primo Spears. That's the only player they have on this squad. I don't know how, if you're Georgetown, you don't fire Pat Ewing. And it's unfortunate because he meant so much and has meant so much to that university and that program. But the numbers don't lie. If you can't win in your conference, aside from a run they had a couple of years ago, it's been a horrible, horrible tenure for the big man.
Yeah, it stinks too, because when you're looking at Patrick Ewing, you're like, all right, well, we hired one of our own. One of our own, it loves this program more than anything. You could almost, maybe not, because you're a little bit more familiar with Patrick Ewing than I am, obviously. But you could almost equate Patrick Ewing more with Georgetown than with the New York Knicks at this point, because he was such. And then you make him the head coach, and you're like, all right, if this doesn't work, what are we going to do? But you almost can't not try it. And just looking down the list of his first couple of years, they were decent seasons. He made the NIT his second year. They were right at 500 his first year. So something obviously went wrong after the year they made the NCAA tournament. Now, granted, the 1920 season, they were under 500, but of course the season was canceled amid the start of the pandemic. And then the next year it was all weird, short, and there's no crowds. They were 13-13, but they squeaked out a NCAA tournament appearance because they ended up winning the conference. And then you thought, that was an average team. It's like, okay, if Patrick Ewing can mold his guys to win a conference tournament when they're right at 500, I know they got bounced in the first round, but still, you can win a conference title, and then you can make the NCAA tournament. All right, what can we do now with a full slate over the next year or 2 or 3? Better recruiting classes. We're going to try to get further away from the COVID weird seasons. And all of a sudden, he wins 13 combined games over the next 2 years. And you're like, what happened? Is it a coaching thing? Is it his staff? Is it the way he recruits guys? Is he not putting guys in proper positions? You can almost write a thesis on this as far as, what went wrong over these last 2 calendar years for Patrick Ewing, I really have no answer for, because I find it hard to believe that now, again, they were middling teams, but he coached up a team in March to win a conference title a couple of years ago. Where did that go? You would think you're able to at least be competitive with that type of coaching, that type of spirit. All of a sudden, they're not doing it, and they won 13 games in the last 2 years. They won 13 games en route to a conference title just 2 years ago. So I don't know what happened. And as far as firing him, I guess you really have no choice if you're going to win 13 games over 2 years. Do they give him one more year? I could almost see them giving him one more year to see what happens, but it'd be one of those short leashes where if they get off to a poor start again for the 23-24 season, in essence of maybe a 1-5 start, a 2-8 start, they're going to cut ties immediately. Then he's going to have maybe a 10-game maximum leash next season.
But then don't bring him back. Going. But don't bring him back then.
You're right. You're right. I agree with you in that sense that I never agree with that type of move. If you're going to give a guy a half a season leash the next year, just get rid of him now, because you're not expecting much now at this point. You're basically expecting to fire him at some point, but you want to give him some extra time, on the payroll? I don't understand how that move is. So I agree with you there, but I do foresee a scenario like that. I mean, or at least I could see a scenario like that for Patrick Ewing.
But they're not even competitive in these games.
Yeah,
I mean,
it's bad. I don't understand.
If you're a betting man, you lean them, and there's, and you ride them out, these losing streaks. And I'm wondering too, you mentioned the recruiting. College sports is all about recruiting, right? Years ago, if St. John's can't keep guys in from the boroughs, whether it's Queens, whether it's the Bronx or Brooklyn, or you get the street kids, you get the real good players. If Washington can't keep these guys in the Northwest or Southwest DC area, if they can't go down to Baltimore and recruit, they're never going to be competitive. Georgetown is, if they can't get these kids. So,
well, it's amazing you mentioned that area too. That is a basketball heavy area.
Of course it is.
It's right in your backyard. What are you doing there? And I get you have the Northeast schools now at this point. You have the influence of the Big Ten, like Rutgers and Penn State, and obviously Maryland right there in College Park. You have, so you have a Power 5 conference over top of you at the very least. You have the other Big East schools like a Syracuse wouldn't be afraid to come down to that area as well. Yeah, obviously you mentioned the St. John's, that entire Northeast area. Villanova, heck, Villanova will come out of Pennsylvania to come down to there as well. So the area is so heavy with basketball talent, but Georgetown, you're right there. You're in the thick of it. This should be the easiest sell at this point, especially when you're coached by, unless Patrick Ewing behind closed doors is just not a good coach at all. You would think at least at the very least, a Georgetown legend like himself and being more of a figurehead of a coach and having a better staff around him, that would maybe make a recruit more enticed to pick Georgetown.
Yeah, but it doesn't make the player better. That's the thing. Unless
you're right. It is twofold there.
Yeah,
it's a two-part process.
Yeah, and 0-19 in conference play last year. And the problem now is when you have the president coming out saying, I've known him for 40 plus years and this and that, you have to throw sentiment aside. You have to cast it aside.
It's funny you said, but that's basically the last line of defense where he doesn't want to fire him yet.
Of course.
Until he gets more pressure.
But now take it a step further. Mm-hmm. The financial resources, right? The boosters, the alumni, the backers. Yeah, I feel bad, but I also, I've said this for years now. It's very hard when you are a living legend to come back and, coach a team or be part of an organization, because people still look at you. You're revered in a certain light
as a player,
but it doesn't mean you're going to be a good head coach.
Right. And this might not be the best example, but at least it's the first one that came to mind is, when Magic Johnson turned to coaching in the NBA. Yeah, that's the first one that comes to mind. He is, some people make the argument that he could be the greatest player of all time. And yet as a coach, it's like he flamed out pretty much immediately. It just doesn't work for these guys. And I think, and another rare example where it does work, a guy like Phil Jackson, he wasn't, the greatest player of all time, but he obviously played in the NBA, very good player for the Knicks. And then he, all of a sudden he's considered the greatest coach in NBA history. So it's hit and miss. This is like if, I know LeBron didn't play college basketball, but this is almost like if LeBron coached his high school and then they were a very middling high school for some reason. And then all of a sudden he just flamed out as a coach because he doesn't know how to put himself in position as a coach compared to how he is as a floor general, as arguably one of the greatest, if not the greatest player of all time. It's just so different. It's a much different dynamic where I guess the magic ran out, so to speak, for Patrick Ewing.
Yeah, and some of these guys too, you mentioned Phil Jackson, he was a role player, right? Pat Riley, bench role player. So these are the guys that sit and they learn under someone else's tutelage and leadership.
They're almost like bench coaches, and then they happen to
That's
bring
exactly it. Because when you're the stud, the star, right?
It caters to you.
Yeah, and I also can't force Nick to be the player that I was.
Right.
It's very hard to do that.
Correct.
Yeah, I think they're going to go in a different direction, and I'm wondering, hear me out on this, if they fire Patrick Ewing, would you make a push? Can you see them making a push for Pitino?
I mean, I know Rick Pitino's the name that's being thrown out there for a lot of jobs now at this point, because he's only at, I mean, it's no disrespect to Iona, but he's only at Iona. This is a guy who's going to be coaching his team in the MAC conference tournament, if it hasn't started already, out in Atlantic City, in our backyard. Now I get they won it the other year, and he's done a heck of a job in his short time at Iona after, what was he coaching in Greece before he came back to the States to coach college basketball? I mean, Pitino has said that he wants to finish his career at Iona, and I get that's probably more coach speak and more public relations speak for the university. But I mean, if you're Rick Pitino, I would find it hard to believe where he was as a coach, particularly within the last 15 years, where he was at Louisville, and that was the peak of college basketball, where he was going up against the Kentucky Louisville rival. Louisville was such a great program. Now again, that's a whole separate story with Kenny Payne. Again, another former player.
Yep.
Coming from the NBA coaching circles. Louisville's a mess this year, but I'm not saying Louisville go after Rick Pitino again. But
horrible,
on the whole Pitino thing, though, everyone's saying, well, he's doing a heck of a job at Iona. Why not? If you're a Power 5 school or one of these bigger basketball programs, why not go after Pitino, bring him in, and give him a chance to he's kind of resurrected his career a little bit. I know it was marred in scandal at Louisville, and he left. But again, he's, despite what you think of him, he is a great head coach. And I'm looking at his record right now, 60-21 at Iona. That's pretty darn good in 3 seasons, considering he won a conference title in his first year. During that shortened season, and obviously, they've won the regular season both years, or the last 2 years at least, at Iona. So 3-year experiment. Does he go back somewhere else? Does anybody else make a push for him? I mean, if you're Georgetown, why would I would at least call him. Why wouldn't you?
Yeah.
Just imagine a basketball school like Georgetown has the history, has the pedigree, has the moniker of this is Georgetown. Like this is your East Coast basketball school. We can, who cares? Big Ten, ACC, whatever the case may be. We're Georgetown, home of legends.
Right.
We're going to reset here. Rick Pitino is the head coach. I mean, come on.
Instant credibility too.
You thought Patrick Ewing brought buzz coming home as the head coach. Rick Pitino, all eyes would be on Georgetown, for better or worse at that point. Yeah. To me, but Pitino does make a little bit of sense just from a basketball perspective. I mean, I think he brings instant credibility. And again, regardless of what you thought about the scandals and how it ended up at Louisville,
he
wins. You're right. He wins. I'm trying to look at the last year where he won less than 20 games. And it happens to be his first year at Iona, where, again, it was 12-6. It was a shortened year. But I'm going back. The last time he won less than 19 games or less than 20 games, Rich, 2001, 2002, that season, 19-13 with Louisville, and they made the NIT. This guy wins 20 games every year.
Yeah.
You can't tell me right now if they hired him, they would not win between 17 and 20 games next year.
And more importantly, you're winning games in your conference. That's the thing. Like, that's what stands out when I look at what Georgetown has just become, 2-18 in the Big East. They were winless in the conference last year. One more on a head coach, and then I want to get to
also, by the way, sneaky little tidbit on Rick Pitino.
Yeah.
Because everyone ages like fine wine. He's only 70.
That's a young 70.
He's a young 70. Give him 5 years at Georgetown. Let him retire after a couple tournament appearances.
Listen, he's won everywhere he's gone, even when you go back to his Providence days.
You're right. I'm liking the idea a little bit more now that you brought it up.
All right, at least you like that as opposed to me saying hardball to the Cowboys. Hi, Nick Kosko joining us from On3 Sports. Mark Adams, Texas Tech, did not coach last night to the loss. against in the loss against West Virginia. Pretty much they've said, see you later. Again, here's another coach, right? 16-16, I think, overall, but 5-13 conference play. Didn't help his cause by some of his comments. I think the expectations were very high for him when you look at the type of contract that he signed. I think it was 15.5 over 5 years. What are you hearing about Texas Tech right now and the decision to move away from Adams?
I mean, nothing really much on the coaching front as far as where they're going to go next. But I mean, it is amazing that his first year they win 27 games. They get to the Sweet 16. And this is a team that just made the national championship game within the last, 3 or 4 years, if memory serves correct. So, they had big expectations for Mark Adams. Obviously, he was in the program for a handful of years as an assistant coach. He was assistant, all over, in other places as well. So, he was a great head coach in other divisions, obviously as a JUCO coach, NIAA back in the day, Division II coach. So he had the head coaching experience. So I guess looking back at it last year, it was an interesting internal hire for Texas Tech. But I mean, they kept with what they knew. But I think they did not meet expectations this year, obviously hovering around that 500 mark all season long. The fact that they let him go after just barely 2 seasons at this point. This is a team that made the Sweet 16 last year. And again, I think it just stems from the alleged comments that he made. I think at that point in today's society, and this is without going off on a tangent with the way society and sports mesh now, especially with over the last almost 10 years now at this point. If something like that comes out, that person is almost assuredly going to be out of a job before it's too late at that point. And, whether it's right or wrong, again, I don't know exactly what was said. This is all alleged. We're just going based on reports here. I'm not stating any type of opinion on what he said. I'm just saying whatever he said, and that was alleged for these insensitive remarks. I think you had to know that the axe was coming down at some point, and it just happened to be right now in the middle of March Madness.
Yeah. And you're right. And sometimes when you have a bad loss and you look at the overall scheme of things, record, conference.
You're basically saying, all right, we have a down year, bad loss. Do we want to keep dealing with the outside noise? Here you go. Absolutely.
Lastly, quickly, Jalen Carter, the big defensive lineman, Georgia top prospect. We know everything that happened with the reckless driving and whatnot. And I'm just wondering, though, there was thought that top 10, maybe. Now all of a sudden you're seeing, 15 to 20, maybe slide into 16, 17.
Yeah.
How much of the off the field issues would cause him to have this major drop? And more importantly, we talk about this, right? The red flags.
Mm-hmm.
How much do you think that will weigh into a team's decision where, let's be honest, I mean, this kid is, he can take over games, man. He can be a very dominant player, and he's going to help any team's defensive front. But I'm just wondering, when you peel back the curtain a little bit, red flags, how much of a drop do you think he's going to have? How much of a hit does his draft status take?
It does take a hit. This is a guy that was a potential number 1 overall pick, depending upon who was going to be selecting in that slot. So, it is a tragedy, without going into the details of what actually happened in the case of the reckless driving, obviously resulted in the death of a Georgia player and a Georgia staffer. So, his alleged involvement, obviously, the reckless driving and whether he was directly responsible or, he's just a part of the cog in that tragic situation. But it's interesting that when that came out, that's what started the slide. But if you remember going back, this is before the combine. I want to say this is last month. It's probably not too long after the national championship as well. Everyone said how good Jalen Carter was, okay, how great he could be as an NFL player, potential number 1 overall pick. This guy might be the best defensive lineman over the last 2 years, best defensive player to come out of Georgia over the last 2 years. People were saying then, even during the year, right after the championship game, about his draft stock, saying that there are character concerns. If you remember, the Mel Kipers, the Todd McShays, guys like that were reporting this. And everyone was kind of brushing, especially the Georgia brass. They were brushing it off. Sure enough, those might actually be valid concerns for Jalen Carter. And then this comes out. So do I still think he's going to be drafted in the first round? I'd be stunned if he's not drafted in the first round. Just how far he's going to slide, I don't know. I know projections are saying 12, 15, 16 range as far as him going the top 10. I still think it's a great possibility that someone's just going to overlook it, take their chance, and deal with it after they draft him. And whether that's going to be a top 5 pick, a top 10 pick, I could see it's a 50-50 shot. Obviously, I know that's not really a good set of odds right there, because obviously I'm kind of like hedging my prediction here. Right. So let's just say it's not really a prediction, but I will say I would be stunned if he's not drafted in the first round. I still say he's going to go probably within those first top 15, top 16 picks. And again, number 1 overall, probably not at this point. No. I think the way the draft is shaping up, especially with the quarterbacks and who's going to take a quarterback, someone's going to probably take a quarterback number 1 overall, and it might be Bryce Young at this point. And that's my pick for the first quarterback to go, and he might be the number 1 overall pick. I don't know who's going to take him yet. Maybe Houston takes him. I have no idea. So, but Jalen Carter to me is still going to be a first round pick. He'll still be a top 15, top 16. But again, you have to monitor this legal situation, because with this out, coupled with the rumors and reports of character red flags before that, I think it's something you definitely have to watch now if you're a team that's going to select Jalen Carter.
Yeah, especially when you give that big time money, right? When you're talking about these top 5 draft picks and whatnot. So, all right, he is Nick Kosko at Nick Kosko 59 College Sports for On3 Sports. Does a great job play-by-play RU Wrestling, and of course Cal Athletics. He's in the midst of a move. Do we have any broadcasting duties this weekend?
Broadcasting duties this week? No, but I'll be on the road next week in Tulsa, Oklahoma for the NCAA Wrestling Championship. So I'll be providing coverage of the best wrestling tournament in the country for On3 Sports. And then next broadcast, we have a little bit of a lull, big travel month here in March, but I'll be back up at Rutgers in the beginning of April for some good old Rutgers baseball.
There you go. Oh, look at that. Wrestling, baseball. He's well rounded and rightfully so. So
it is spring. It's a nice day out today.
It's gorgeous out today. This is what I'm saying. When it's only 6 o'clock and it's still light out, this makes me happy.
Oh, it's getting better.
Yes, day by day, brother. Day by day. All right, everyone, give Nick a follow. Appreciate you jumping on board for a couple minutes of a Thursday edition BYP Pal.
Appreciate you.